Feel the heavy titanium pulse of a story that beats with the rhythm of raw ambition and unbreakable resolve. We bring you the most intense cinematic experiences where the human heart meets the cold precision of destiny. Subscribe today and keep your finger on the pulse of greatness with us.
My son looked me in the eyes and said, "Dad, it was just sitting in a drawer. You weren't using it." That was the moment I understood that everything I thought I knew about my own family had been a lie I told myself for years. My name is Raymond, and I am 64 years old. I spent 31 years working as a general contractor in Knoxville, Tennessee. I built houses from the ground up, poured foundations, framed walls, ran electrical alongside my crew on cold January mornings when nobody wanted to be out of bed. I know what it means to build something. I also know, better than most, what it looks like when something starts to rot from the inside out. You can paint over it. You can hang pictures on the wall, but the rot is still there, spreading quietly. And one day the floor gives out beneath you, and you're standing in the wreckage wondering how you didn't see it coming. My wife Dorothy passed away 2 years ago this past March. Pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to the end, we had 11 weeks. The doctors used words like aggressive and swift progression. And I nodded along in those sterile little offices because what else do you do when someone is reading you the final chapter of the life you built with another person? Dorothy was 61 years old. She had just retired from teaching 4th grade. She had plans. We both did. We were going to drive the Pacific Coast Highway that summer. She had a little notebook on the kitchen counter with handwritten lists, places to stop, things to eat, lighthouses she wanted to photograph. That notebook is still on the counter. I haven't moved it. After she passed, I was not doing well. That is the honest truth, and I am not ashamed to say it. I am a man who knows how to work, how to fix things, how to keep moving. But grief does not respond to any of those skills. Grief just sits down in the middle of your chest and stays there, heavy and quiet. And you learn to breathe around it. My son and his wife offered to move in with me for a while, to help out around the house, to keep me company. My son is 38. His wife is 35. They have a boy, my grandson, who was 15 at the time. I thought it was a generous offer. I told them I appreciated it more than I could say. I told them the house had plenty of room. And all of that was true. What I did not do was put anything in writing. That was my first mistake, and I have spent a long time sitting with that. Dorothy's father had been a watchmaker. His shop was in Asheville, North Carolina, and he ran it for over 40 years before his hands got too stiff to hold the small tools. He was a precise, quiet man who measured everything twice and spoke carefully and meant every word he said. When Dorothy and I got married in 1988, he gave me his personal pocket watch. It was a Hamilton Railway grade piece, manufactured in 1923. The casing was gold-filled, worn smooth at the edges from decades of being carried in a vest pocket. On the inside of the back cover, her father had engraved our wedding date and 2 words in small, clean letters: "Keep her." He told me it was the only instruction I would ever need. I carried that watch every day of our married life. When I retired and stopped needing it for work, I kept it on my dresser in a small wooden tray Dorothy had bought at a craft fair in Gatlinburg. Every morning I would pick it up, feel the weight of it in my palm for just a moment, and set it back down. It was not a superstition. It was just a way of remembering that the most important thing I had ever done was marry that woman and try every day to deserve her. After she died, the watch became something different to me. It became the last solid object that connected all 3 of us, her father, Dorothy, and me. 3 people who had loved each other across 30 years, all condensed into something small enough to hold in one hand. I kept it in the same wooden tray. I still touched it every morning. Some days it was the first thing that reminded me I had a reason to get up. My son and his wife and my grandson moved in 4 months after the funeral. At first, things were fine. My daughter-in-law cooked on weeknights. My grandson helped me carry things in the garage. My son and I watched football on Sunday afternoons, the way we used to when he was young. I told myself this was good. that Dorothy would have wanted this. That family was supposed to hold together when things got hard. But things shift slowly, and you don't always notice until you're already far from where you started. By the 8th month, my son and his wife had taken over the master bedroom. They said it made more sense, given the size of the closet, given that I didn't sleep well anyway and could use the smaller room at the end of the hall with its own bathroom. I moved. I told myself it was practical. By the 10th month, my daughter-in-law had reorganized the kitchen the way she liked it, and I could not find a single thing where I had left it for 30 years. By month 11, my grandson had 3 friends over on school nights until 10 o'clock making noise in the living room. And when I mentioned it to my son, he said I needed to be more flexible, that this was their home now too, that I had invited them. I had. And that fact was used against me regularly. I started spending more time in the garage. I have a woodworking setup out there, a table saw, a bandsaw, a lathe I've had since 1996. Building things by hand has always helped me think. In the months after Dorothy died, I had made a small cabinet for her gravesite at the cemetery. A little wooden box with her initials where I could leave flowers out of the wind. The garage was the one place in that house that still felt like mine. I would go out there after dinner and just work. Sand something. Fit a joint. Breathe the smell of sawdust and linseed oil. It was the only hour of the day I felt like myself. My son started making comments about the garage, that I should clear out some of the tools to make room for his car, that the table saw was a liability, that somebody could get hurt, that maybe at my age I should think about whether I really needed all of it. I did not respond to these comments directly. I am not a man who argues easily. I tend to go quiet and think. Looking back, I understand that this was interpreted as agreement. In February of last year, I had a procedure done. Nothing life-threatening, a cardiac catheterization to check on some blockage my doctor had been monitoring. I was at the hospital for 2 days. One night of observation. My son drove me and brought me home. It was routine. I was grateful he was there. When I got home, I rested for the better part of a week. I did not go into the garage much. I did not go through my dresser or my things or any of the rooms in the house that I had slowly, without realizing it, already started to think of as theirs rather than mine. It was a Tuesday when I noticed. I went to pick up the pocket watch from the wooden tray on my dresser, and the tray was empty. I stood there for a long moment. I thought I must have moved it somewhere. I checked the nightstand. I checked the bathroom counter. I checked the small shelf by the bedroom door, where I sometimes set things down without thinking. It was not in any of those places. I went through every drawer. I checked the pockets of jackets in the closet. I got down on my knees and looked under the dresser and the bed. My heart was going in a way that had nothing to do with the procedure I had just recovered from. I found my son in the kitchen and I asked him, as calmly as I could manage, if he had seen the pocket watch. The gold one. The one that was always in the tray on my dresser. He did not look at me right away. He poured himself a glass of water and drank half of it standing at the sink with his back to me. And then he turned around, and he said, "Dad, I need to talk to you about something." The words came out slowly, like he had been rehearsing them. He said that while I was in the hospital, he had gone through some things in the house. He said it was something he had been thinking about for a while. He said there were things I was not using, things that were just sitting around collecting dust, and he had made the decision to sell a few items to a consignment dealer and an antique buyer he knew. The pocket watch was one of them. Also, he mentioned, a silver picture frame from the hallway and a small landscape painting that had hung in the dining room since before my children were born. I asked him when he had done this. He said while I was in the hospital. I asked him how much he had sold the watch for. He said $220. I asked him what he had used the money for. He said he and his wife were trying to get ahead on some bills. He said living in the house helped, but it hadn't solved everything. He said he thought I would understand, that I had always been reasonable, that the watch was old and I wasn't wearing it anywhere, and he hadn't thought I'd mind that much. I want to tell you what I said next. But the truth is I didn't say anything for a very long time. I stood in that kitchen looking at my son, this man I had raised, and I tried to find something in his face that looked like remorse. What I found instead was a kind of careful blankness, the expression of a person waiting to see how much trouble they were in so they could calibrate how sorry to appear. I went to my bedroom and closed the door. I do not know how long I sat on the edge of that bed. Long enough for the light to change. Long enough for the sound of the television to start up in the living room and my grandson's laugh to carry down the hallway. I sat there and I thought about Dorothy's father and the way he had shaken my hand on our wedding day. I thought about the way Dorothy had handed me that watch in the church anteroom, just the two of us. Her eyes bright with something that was not quite tears. I thought about how I had carried it for 35 years, without once setting it down somewhere careless or treating it as less than what it was. $220. The next morning I called the antique buyer. I found the name through my son's phone, which he had left on the kitchen table. I called the number and spoke with a man named Gerald, who confirmed that, yes, he had purchased a Hamilton pocket watch from my son approximately 8 days prior. I told him my name and explained the situation carefully. I told him the watch had been sold without my knowledge or consent, that it was my personal property, that I wanted to buy it back. There was a pause on the line. Gerald said, "Mr. Raymond, I think you should come down to the shop." I said I would be there that afternoon. He said, "There's something we found when we went to service the watch. Something I think you're going to want to see in person." I did not sleep that night. I lay in that small bedroom at the end of the hall and stared at the ceiling and thought about every possible thing that could be inside a watch that would make a man speak in that careful, quiet voice. I thought about Dorothy's father and his years of precision work, his steady hands, his habit of putting everything exactly where it needed to be. By morning I had a feeling I could not name. Gerald's shop was on a side street in the older part of town, wedged between a framing studio and an insurance office. The kind of shop with a hand-lettered sign and a door that announced itself with a small bell. Gerald was a heavy-set man in his late 50s, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the particular calm of someone who spent their days around old things. He came out from behind the counter when I walked in, and he shook my hand the way people used to shake hands with both of his. He brought the watch out from a back room in a small cloth pouch. He set it on the glass countertop, and he looked at me for a moment before he said anything. He said his nephew, who did the servicing, had noticed when he opened the back casing that the inner dust cover a secondary panel that sits behind the movement had been modified. Someone had hollowed out a thin channel along the inside edge and sealed something into it. His nephew had used a fine blade to work the edge loose, and what came out was a piece of paper, folded several times to the width of a fingernail. Gerald slid the paper across the counter toward me. My hands were not entirely steady when I unfolded it. The handwriting was Dorothy's. I would know it anywhere. The small, slanted letters, the way she always crossed her T's with a little curl. The paper was thin, almost translucent, the kind she used for letters. She had written the date at the top, April 14th, 2 years before she died, 14 months before the diagnosis. She wrote, "Raymond, if you are reading this, something has happened, or you have finally taken the watch in to be serviced after all these years, which honestly, I know you never would. So it is the other thing. I need you to know a few things I haven't said well enough out loud. The account at First Tennessee in my name alone, the one from before we were married that I kept for no reason except stubbornness, has your name on it now. Added you last spring. The number is in the blue address book under the letter G, which I know is strange, but it was the first letter I thought of. There is enough there to matter. Use it for the Pacific Coast Highway. Use it for whatever comes next. I also need you to know that you were the right answer to every question I was ever afraid to ask. Keep yourself, Raymond. That is my instruction to you. All my love, Dorothy." I do not know how long I stood at that counter. Gerald had the decency to step into the back room and stay there. I read the note 3 times. The 4th time I read it, I stopped at "Keep yourself," and I understood that she had known about the engraving, had known her father's words, and had answered them from wherever she was now, answering the question of what came after "keep her," when she was no longer there to be kept. I bought the watch back from Gerald for $350. He did not argue about the price, and he did not make me feel small for any of it. He put it back in the cloth pouch and he handed it to me and he said, quietly, that he hoped things got better. I thanked him, and I meant it. I drove to my bank before I drove home. The blue address book was in the second kitchen drawer, behind the takeout menus and the extra rubber bands. I had looked at that book 100 times without ever thinking to open it to the letter G. The account number was there, written in her handwriting on a small index card tucked into the page. I went to the First Tennessee branch on Kingston Pike, and I sat down with an account manager named Patricia, who was patient and professional, and who confirmed, after verifying my identity and the documentation, that Dorothy had indeed added my name as joint owner 3 years prior, and that the account was active, and that the balance was significant enough that I had to ask her to repeat the number. Dorothy had been careful with money her entire life. She had a teacher's pension. She had invested small amounts steadily for 30 years, never touching it, never mentioning it. The account was enough that I did not have to stay in that house one more day if I chose not to. I drove home, and I sat in the garage for a while. I ran my hand along the edge of the workbench she had helped me build in 1999, a Saturday project that had taken us all weekend and ended with pizza on the garage floor and her laughing at something I cannot remember now. The garage smelled the same as it always had. Sawdust and oil and cold concrete. Then I went inside and I called an attorney. Her name came recommended from my doctor's wife, who had used her for an estate matter the year before. She was direct and thorough, and she did not waste my time. I explained the living situation. I explained that my son and his family had moved in under an informal arrangement, with no lease, no written agreement, no financial contribution beyond occasional groceries. I explained the situation with the watch. She told me that in the state of Tennessee, what my son had done constituted conversion, the civil equivalent of theft, and that I had grounds to pursue compensation. She also told me that because there was no lease and no formal tenancy agreement, I could issue a notice to vacate, and the timeline, while not instantaneous, was significantly shorter than many people assumed. I asked her to prepare the notice. It took 30 days. 30 days that I spent largely in the garage, finishing a rocking chair I had been building since the previous fall. 30 days of dinners where nobody talked about the notice on the refrigerator. My daughter-in-law stopped cooking. My grandson stayed mostly in his room. My son attempted on 2 separate occasions to have a conversation with me in which he suggested I was being unreasonable, that family did not do this to each other, that Dorothy would not have wanted this. I let him finish both times. Then I told him, without raising my voice, that he had sold his mother's watch while I was lying in a hospital bed, and that I wanted him to think carefully about whether he wanted to continue making arguments about what his mother would have wanted. He did not bring it up again. The day they left, I stood at the front door and watched the truck pull out of the driveway. My grandson paused on the porch on his way to the car and looked at me with an expression I recognized, not the calculated blankness of his father, but something more genuine, closer to shame. He said, "I'm sorry, Grandpa. I didn't know about the watch." I told him I believed him. I told him he was welcome in my house any time he wanted to come on his own. He nodded and went to the car, and I watched until the truck turned the corner and disappeared. I went back inside. I walked through every room. I opened windows. The master bedroom had been theirs for so long that it had taken on a different smell, something foreign. And I stood in the doorway for a moment before walking in and opening the curtains and the window above the bed. The afternoon light came in clean, and I stood there and let it. I put the pocket watch back in the wooden tray on the dresser. The same tray, the same position. I picked it up and felt the weight of it and opened the back casing and looked at the note. Still folded, still there, the way Dorothy had left it. Then I closed it again. Over the following weeks, I made some changes. I moved back into the master bedroom. I had a locksmith come and rekey the house. I called a financial advisor, a woman my attorney recommended, and I sat down with her and looked honestly at what I had and what I needed and what the rest of this life could reasonably look like. I called my daughter, who lives in Colorado, and who had been following everything from a distance with a kind of helpless worry she was not able to fully express over the phone. She flew out in October, and we sat on the back porch for 3 days, and talked more honestly than we had in years. She cried. I cried. We ate takeout and watched bad television, and she told me about her job and her dog and the man she had been seeing for 2 years, who I had never properly asked about. I listened. It turned out that listening was something I had gotten better at since Dorothy died. Maybe the one thing grief had given me that could be called a gift. I filed the civil claim against my son for conversion of personal property. His attorney contacted mine, and after several weeks of back and forth, we reached a settlement. He paid me back the assessed replacement value of the watch, the picture frame, and the painting. He also paid my legal fees. I do not know how he came up with the money, and I did not ask. I did not want any more from him. I wanted what was mine, and I got it. I did not speak to my son for a long time after that. Somewhere around 6 months in, he sent me a letter. A handwritten letter, which surprised me. It was not a perfect letter. It made some excuses in the middle that he should have cut out. But at the beginning and at the end, it sounded like him, like the boy I had raised. The young man I had driven to college, with a truck full of furniture. The person I had wanted to believe was still in there underneath the choices he had made. I read it twice, and I put it in the drawer of my nightstand. I have not responded yet. I am still deciding what I want to say, and whether I have it in me to say it. I think I do. I think Dorothy would say that the capacity to forgive and the requirement to forget are not the same thing, and that knowing the difference is how you protect yourself while remaining human. I think about her every day. I think about the note and the way she must have written it sitting somewhere private, folding that paper into a strip no wider than her thumbnail, working it into the channel her father had known was there, had perhaps always intended to be used for exactly this kind of thing. A watchmaker's trick. A hiding place no one would find, unless they looked with the right tools and the right knowledge. She had trusted that it would be found eventually, or that it would never need to be found at all. And either way, she had said what she needed to say. That was Dorothy. Precise and patient and planning for contingencies in small, quiet ways that nobody noticed until they needed to. Last spring I drove the Pacific Coast Highway. I went alone, which was not the plan, but it was what it was, and I made peace with that before I left Knoxville. I had her little notebook from the kitchen counter. I stopped at the lighthouses she had circled. I ate the food she had written down in her small, careful handwriting. I pulled over at Vista Point south of San Francisco and stood at the railing with the Pacific going on forever in front of me, and the wind loud enough that nobody would have heard anything I said out loud, so I said a few things. It took 12 days. On the last night, I sat in a motel outside Eureka with the pocket watch on the nightstand and the notebook open in my lap, and I went through every page and made a small check mark next to each thing we had done together, even if it had only been me doing it. It was not nothing. It was something. It was, I think, what she intended. I am back home in Knoxville now. The garage is mine. The rocking chair is on the front porch where I put it in November, and I sit in it on cool evenings and drink coffee and watch the street. Some days the grief still sits down heavy in my chest the way it always has. I do not expect that to change, but I breathe around it now the way I have learned to. And the house is quiet and clean and arranged the way I like it. And every morning I pick up the pocket watch from the wooden tray and feel the weight of it, and I know what it says on the inside of the casing, and I know what it says on the paper inside the paper, and I set it back down gently the way it deserves to be set down. I kept her. She kept me. That is the whole story, if you want to know the truth. And if you are listening to this, and you have a keepsake in a drawer somewhere that belonged to someone you loved, do not assume it will be there tomorrow. And if you are letting people stay in your home out of love, or loneliness, or grief, make sure that generosity is written down somewhere. Not because you distrust them, because love without boundaries is not love. It is an open door. And not everyone who walks through it deserves to stay. Thank you for being here with me today. If this story stayed with you, I ask you to leave a comment below, just a word, just a line. It matters more than you know. And if you want to hear the next one, it is waiting for you right there on your screen.